There will come a time when the name of Aaron Burr will be cleared from the prejudice which now surrounds it, when he will stand in the public estimation side by side with Alexander Hamilton, whom he shot in a duel in 1804, but whom in many respects he curiously resembled. When the white light of history shall have searched them both, they will appear as two remarkable men, each having his own undoubted faults and at the same time his equally undoubted virtues. Burr and Hamilton were born within a year of each other, Burr being a grandson of Jonathan Edwards, and Alexander Hamilton being the illegitimate son of a Scottish merchant in the West Indies. Each of them was short in stature, keen of intellect, of great physical endurance, courage, and impressive personality. Each, as a young man, served on the staff of Washington during the Revolutionary War, and each of them quarrelled with him, though in a different way. Burr was quite unjustly suspected by Washington of looking over the latter's shoulder while he was writing. This, however, was the end of their altercation. The cause of Hamilton's difference with his chief in 1781 was miscommunication and hurt pride, but it was a much more serious quarrel, so much so that the young officer left his staff position in a fury and took no part in the war until the end, when he was present at the Battle of Yorktown. Burr, on the other hand, helped Montgomery to storm the heights of Quebec and nearly reached the upper citadel when his commander was shot dead and the Americans retreated. In all this confusion, Burr showed himself a man of mettle. The slain Montgomery was 6 feet high, but Burr carried his body away with wonderful strength amid a shower of musket balls and grape shot. Burr continued his military service until the war was ended, routing the enemy at Hackensack, enduring the horrors of Valley Forge, commanding a brigade at the Battle of Monmouth, and heading the defense of the city of New Haven. He was also Attorney General of New York, was elected to the United States Senate, was tied with Jefferson for the presidency, and then became Vice President. Both Hamilton and Burr were effective speakers, but while Hamilton was wordy and diffuse, Burr spoke always to the point, with clear and cogent reasoning. Both were lavish spenders of money, and both were engaged in duels before the fatal one in which Hamilton fell. Both believed in dueling as the only way of settling an affair of honor. Neither of them was averse to love affairs, though it may be said that Hamilton sought women, while Burr was rather sought by women. When Secretary of the Treasury, Hamilton was obliged to confess an adulterous amour in order to save himself from the charge of corrupt practices in public office. So long as Burr's wife lived, he was a devoted, faithful husband to her. Hamilton was obliged to confess his illicit acts while his wife, formerly Miss Elizabeth Schuyler, was living. She spent her later years in buying and destroying the compromising documents which her husband had published for his countrymen to read. The most extraordinary thing about Aaron Burr was the magnetic quality that was felt by everyone who approached him. The roots of this penetrated down into a deep vitality. He was always young, always alert, polished in manner, courageous with that sort of courage which does not even recognize the presence of danger, charming in conversation, and able to adapt it to men or women of any age whatever. His hair was still dark in his 80th year. His step was still elastic, his motions were still as spontaneous and energetic as those of a youth. So it was that everyone who knew him experienced his fascination. The rough troops whom he led through the Canadian swamps felt the iron hand of his discipline, yet they were devoted to him, since he shared all their toils, faced all their dangers, and ate with them the scraps of hide which they gnawed to keep the breath of life in their shrunken bodies. Burr's discipline was indeed very strict, so that at first raw recruits rebelled against it. On one occasion, the men of an untrained company resented it so bitterly that they decided to shoot Colonel Burr as he paraded them for roll call that evening. Burr somehow got word of it and contrived to have all the cartridges drawn from their muskets. When the time for the roll call came, one of the malcontents leaped from the front line and levelled his weapon at Burr. Like lightning, Burr's sword flashed from its scabbard with such a vigorous stroke as to cut the man's arm and partly to cleave the musket. "Take your place in the ranks," said Burr. The mutineer obeyed, dripping with blood. A month later, every man in that company was devoted to his commander. But with this high spirit and readiness to fight, Burr had a most pleasing way of meeting everyone who came to him. When he was arrested in the western forests, charged with high treason, the sound of his voice won from jury after jury verdicts of acquittal. Often the sheriffs would not arrest him. One grand jury not merely exonerated him from all public misdemeanors, but brought in a strong presentment against the officers of the government for molesting him. It was the same everywhere. Burr made friends and devoted allies among all sorts of men. During his stay in France, England, Germany and Sweden, he interested such men as Charles Lamb, Jeremy Bentham, Sir Walter Scott and Goethe. They found his mind able to meet with theirs on equal terms. Burr indeed had graduated as a youth with honours from Princeton and had continued his studies there after graduation, which was then a most unusual thing to do. But of course he learned most from his contact with men and women of the world. Harriet Beecher Stowe in The Minister's Wooing has given what is probably an exact likeness of Aaron Burr, with his brilliant gifts and some of his defects. It is strong testimony to the character of Burr that Mrs. Stowe set out to paint him as a villain. But before she had written long, she felt his fascination and made her readers, in their own despite, admirers of this remarkable man. In his 20th year, there seems to have begun the first of the romances that run through the story of his long career. Perhaps one ought not to call it the first romance, for at 18, while he was studying law at Lichfield, a girl whose name has been suppressed made an open avowal of love for him. Almost at the same time, an heiress with a large fortune would have married him, had he been willing to accept her hand. But at this period he was only a boy and did not take such things seriously. 2 years later, after Burr had seen hard service at Quebec and on Manhattan Island, his name was associated with that of a very beautiful girl named Margaret Moncrief. She was the daughter of a British major, but in some way she had been captured while within the American lines. Her captivity was regarded as little more than a joke, but while she was thus a prisoner, she saw a great deal of Burr. For several months they were comrades, after which General Putnam sent her with his compliments to her father. It certainly was no very serious affair, since in the following year Burr met a lady who, while she lived, was the only woman for whom he ever really cared. This was Theodosia Prevost, the wife of a major in the British Army. Burr met her first in 1777, while she was living with her sister in Westchester County. Burr's command was 15 miles across the river, but distance and danger made no difference to him. He used to mount a swift horse, inspect his sentinels and outposts, and then gallop to the Hudson, where a barge rowed by 6 soldiers awaited him. The barge was well supplied with buffalo skins, upon which the horse was thrown with his legs bound, and then half an hour's rowing brought them to the other side. There Burr resumed his horse, galloped to the house of Mrs. Prevost, and after spending a few hours with her, returned in the same way. Mrs. Prevost was well educated and possessed charming manners, with a disposition both gentle and affectionate. Her husband died soon after the beginning of the war, and then Burr married her. No more ideal family life could be conceived than his, and the letters which passed between the two are full of adoration. His wife died in 1794, and he then gave a double affection to his daughter Theodosia, whose beauty and accomplishments were known throughout the country. Burr took the greatest pains in her education, and believed that she should be trained, as he had been, to be brave, industrious, and patient. He himself, who's been described as a voluptuary, delighted in the endurance of cold and heat and of severe labour. Theodosia Burr married into a family of good old English stock, where riches were abundant, and high character was regarded as the best of all possessions. In 1812, when her husband had been elected governor of his state, her only child, a sturdy boy of 11, died, and Theodosia's health was shattered by her sorrow. In the same year, Burr returned from a sojourn in Europe, and his loving daughter embarked from Charleston on a schooner, the Patriot, to meet her father in New York. When Burr arrived, he was met by a letter which told him that his grandson was dead, and that Theodosia was coming to him. Weeks sped by, and no news was heard of the ill-fated Patriot. At last it became evident that she must have gone down, or in some other way have been lost. Burr and Governor Alston wrote to each other letter after letter, of which each one seems to surpass the agony of the other. At last, all hope was given up. Governor Alston died soon after, of a broken heart. Perhaps no man in our country has been so vehemently accused regarding his relations with the other sex. The most improbable stories were told about Burr, even by his friends. As to his enemies, they took boundless pains to paint him in the blackest colours. According to them, no woman was safe from his intrigues. He was a perfect devil in leading them astray and then casting them aside. It is impossible to believe that the Spartan Burr, whose life was one of incessant labour and whose kindliness toward everyone was so well known, should have deserved a commentary like this. The charge of immorality is so easily made and so difficult of disproof that it has been flung promiscuously at all the great men of history. It is difficult to come to any fixed opinion regarding the moral character of Aaron Burr. As a soldier, he was brave to the point of recklessness. As a political leader, he was almost the equal of Jefferson, and quite superior to Hamilton. As a man of the world, he was highly accomplished, polished in manner, charming in conversation. He made friends easily, and he forgave his enemies with a broad-mindedness that is unusual. On the other hand, in his political career there was a touch of insincerity, and it can scarcely be denied that he used his charm too often to the injury of those women who could not resist his insinuating ways and the caressing notes of his rich voice. But as a husband in his youth he was devoted, affectionate and loyal, while as a father he was little less than worshipped by the daughter whom he reared so carefully. One of his biographers very truly says that no such wretch as Burr has been declared to be could have won and held the love of such a wife and such a daughter as Burr had. When all the other witnesses have been heard, let the two Theodosias be summoned, and especially that daughter who showed toward him an affectionate veneration, unsurpassed by any recorded in history or romance. Such an advocate as Theodosia the Younger must avail in some degree, even though the culprit were brought before the bar of heaven itself.